All right, so back to this tricky conversation. Yeah? So what we're thinking of doing now maybe is just illustrating, illustrating these principles more in practice, in terms of like how you would apply the principles sort of thing. That sound all right? What's happening? You're asking, Rebecca, you want to ask something first?
She wants to ask about the principles.
Oh, you want to ask about the principles? Yeah, in practice. Is that what you were going to ask? Yeah. What were you going to say?
So, as an example, with abortion.
Yep. Well, I think stuff like that is pretty obvious. What I would probably like to do is focus more on the things that are not so obvious. It's the things that are obvious that most of us start to go, oh, I need to do with that, and I need to do with this, and I need to do with that. And that is true, you do. You do need to do with these things. But if the fact that it's already obvious means that you've already got a level of aware, not yet awakened maybe, but certainly aware. And when you're aware, you can begin to work your way towards awaken by using the principles that we've discussed. The problem for most of us is the areas where we're not aware. And often these areas are very, let's look at the reason why that's the case, as to why certain things are less obvious and we're less aware of them. So let's do that first, I think.
Just creaking a bit there.
Creaking, sorry about the creaking in the recording.
Sound.
It's squeaky. It's a bit squeaky. Up and down over it.
Maybe we need to tighten these.
The trouble is if I tighten it too much.
No, these. I think it's
these.
Those,
is it?
Yeah.
No, it's not. Just here's something. If I tighten it too much, I won't be able to flip it over. But yeah. Okay. The level of awareness of problems here on Earth is very, very low in terms of the level of awareness of what's loving and what's not loving. So, and the reason why that is the case is that if we look at the spheres of the spirit world, so let's start at 1, 2, 3, and we'll work our way up. The Earth life is actually quite strongly entrenched in just lower than the middle of the first sphere of the spirit world. So it's actually in the hells of the spirit world. That's normal Earth life. So we call that what we view as normal is actually from God's perspective. So remember here, the discussion began yesterday with God's standard of love. From God's perspective, the standard of love on earth is in the hells. So that means that almost everything you think is love is not love. Now, when we say that to people, they don't really get the significance of that statement. It's sort of like earlier when I was talking to Perry about the significance of understanding the principle behind the law. Most of us, when we hear it first, we just don't understand it, how big of an impact that's going to have on you when you really get it in your heart. And the same applies to really getting this in your heart. Once you realise that the earth life is, by God's standards, in the hell of the spirit world, right? Then you can start to see there's a number of things that you should start to that this fact should start to make you realise about your own life, right? In that there is this sort of small area of life which is called normal life, where below that area of life we think that's bad. So let's write that in red. Right? So we think that anybody who does the things that are not a part of normal life, they're bad. An example of that is someone murders another person, that was bad. Someone rapes another person, that was bad. Now, I'm not saying that everybody on earth believes it's bad. I'm just saying that the majority of people and the majority of laws on earth, human laws, believe it's bad. So that means the average person on earth believes it's bad. The problem is that when you go above this band of area where people think it's good, everybody on earth also believes that is bad. So now you're operating on earth within a band that God defines as actually quite evil. God's laws define as very unloving. And yet on earth, we've got the bottom of that band is, underneath that is unloving. God, the world's definition of unloving is that's unloving. But also if you start to progress beyond what the average person in the world believes is good, they also believe that's unloving, for the most part. Now that also means, for the majority of us, that applies to us too. We think the same way as that. You follow? So that means that, let's say somebody's really truthful with us. The truth is actually something that is very high from God's definition of love. In fact, if you're completely honest and truthful all the time, even if you've not received any of God's love, you will be in the second sphere of the spirit world in terms of your spiritual development, if you're honest and truthful all the time, with yourself and with others. But what does the average person on earth feel about someone who's honest and truthful all the time? A lot of people don't like it, do they? It's like, that person's self-righteous person. Don't want to, they're always telling me the truth about, whatever they believe is true, and I don't want to hear it anymore. I'm sick of them. That's the average person's response. Because the average person believes that a person who's truthful all the time is bad. They believe that that's unloving. So we have a very narrow band on earth, this band here, of what we believe is loving. But actually, from God's perspective, it's quite evil. But from human perspective, that's what love is. That's what love will do. Another example is, if Mary needs cheering up, I'm loving if I cheer her up. Just a simple thing, right? If she needs cheering up, I'm loving if she does it. And if I need cheering up, she's loving if she cheers me up. From God's perspective, that's completely false. If a person is sad, from God's perspective, they need to feel their sadness. I need to help them access their sadness.
Do you need to help them?
If I'm loving, I will want to help them access their sadness. I don't have to help them, but if I'm loving, I will want to help them feel their sadness, which is exactly the opposite, probably, of what the person wants. So let's say I've got some sadness. If Mary reminds me of it every single day, if I'm in this state of love, in this sort of evil place really, I'm going to go, Mary, you're being an unloving bitch now, right? I don't like you anymore. If you keep up this, you and I are off. We're done if you don't do this thing that I define as love for me, and you keep telling me the truth, which I don't want to hear because I'm sick of hearing it from you, right? Keep hearing this truth, this divine truth stuff, crap. Just don't want to hear it from you anymore, right? And so I'm feeling that she's being unloving, and yet she would be being loving from God's perspective. So this is our problem, is a lot of times we think, oh, that was okay, that was loving, that was okay. Right? Now, let's give you some little examples that we've experienced in the last few weeks with others. Let's start with problem number one. These are just little problems, seemingly small problems, right? Okay, for this event, we had originally 80 people were booked for this event. Mary sent out an email 1 week ago saying, if you need to cancel, please cancel so other people can come. I think about 10 people cancelled.
Yeah, there's probably a few more than 80. I think we might have hit 90 at one point.
Hit 90 at one point.
And we got back to 75.
Okay, so we were 90 at one point, and then 1 week close to the event, Mary sent out an email saying, if you want to cancel, please cancel now so other people can come. 15 people cancelled. But they only cancelled after Mary sent out the email. Very unloving. Because Mary shouldn't have had to have sent out an email in order for them to be loving. Can you see? But they thought they were being loving. But they weren't being loving because Mary had to send the email before they were being loving. So it wasn't motivated by them. It was motivated by Mary asking them to be loving. So problem here is if somebody asks me to love them, I will. But if somebody doesn't, then I won't. That's the problem, isn't it? Because if it was really love, I'd love them all the time, not just when they ask me. Right? Okay, 15 council. So we're left with 75. Okay. What happens? More people book.
No.
There were, it was 79 in the end, four extra
Yes,
books.
yes.
So we
that's
had
true.
then 4 extras because of these.
Well, my math, some people, when I put up the notice, this is why it's all a bit topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
But yeah, thereabouts, yeah.
Okay.
There's probably
Now,
more than 4.
with these 15 cancellations, how do you cancel something that you've organised well in advance? Like, you'd have to cancel accommodation. You'd have to cancel your travel. This tells me that they didn't organise any of those things. So how unloving is that? They haven't even organised their own life enough to come to a place to learn more about love. Enough, even though they've made a booking. Why did they do that? It's because the event was free. Now, it's interesting. Version of love. If something's free, what do?
Exploit it.
You exploit it. So, free food, you eat as much of it as you possibly can. Free fruit and veggies, you get 10 weeks worth, and most of it goes rotten. Anything that's free, if somebody decided to give you a free car, you'd take it no matter what it was, right? Doesn't matter how unloving it is for the environment or anything, most people would take it, right? Because this version of love, the world's version of love, says exploit anything that's free. Doesn't it? Can you feel that? Can you even feel in your own self the feeling you have that says, it's free? Can you feel yourself light up? It's free. Maybe you should go, that kind of thing. All right? So many people book our events because they're free. Right? But does that mean they appreciate the event? See, oftentimes not. So this version of love says people, if you give them things for free, so the world's version of love at the moment is if you give them things for free, they won't appreciate them, so you've got to charge something. That's the world's version of love. Says, otherwise all the people who exploit free will exploit you, right? So you've got to charge them something. And you can see why most events on the planet, we were in Austria, they charge you to go to the toilet. You pull on the side of the road, see in Australia, you pull on the side of the road to go to the toilet and it's all free. In Austria, pull on the side of the road to go to the toilet, it all cost you, it was €1 or €2. So my bodily functions are being taxed.
And isn't that supposedly
because people exploit free?
Yes. Yeah. They don't care for the toilet that's
They
free.
don't care for the toilet. They don't look after
have
the
to
toilet. Somebody has
pay
to
for
clean the
someone.
toilet. They don't pay for someone to pay the toilet. There was another place we went to in Germany. We pulled up at the toilet, went to the toilet, and there was this guy who's outside who cleans them. So we gave him a tip. But the toilet was free. Right? Now, when something's actually free, what the average person does is exploit it. And then, of course, they have to make a rule, another version of love that says, we've got to stop these people exploiting. So what we're going to do is we're going to charge them some money to stop them exploiting. But that's not love either. Right? But anyway, we got the 90, there's 15 in council, and they only booked because it was free. And then they didn't organise their life to get there, and it was easy to cancel because it was free. Right? So now we end up with 79. So the night before we started this event was 79. How many people rocked up?
54. 53, 54.
Right? 53 rocked up. So that's 26 people who didn't cancel, which is even more unloving than this, isn't it? Even more unloving. And they didn't turn up either. Right? So you could say the people who cancelled, now some of them, very few of them will say to us, we're cancelling because of this thing. And quite often, like in Brussels, we had one person cancel because their mother died. And we go, fair enough, you're going to go to a funeral, there's things to organise, you'd understand that. But most people just say, can you cancel me? And it's interesting, the website is actually lets you cancel yourself, and yet even though that's the case, they email Mary and tell her to cancel them. And I'm going, but you can do it on the website faster than you can email Mary. Does that make any sense? Well, it does, because they want to be nursed. And down here, another version of this love says, nurse me. You know, my mother nursed me, my parents nursed me, people who love me nurse me. They're claiming that Jesus and Mary, they should love me, so they should nurse me. Right? Another version of love, out of harmony with God's truth, but this hellish version of love says, I should expect it, right? Should be nursed. So now we've had, of the 90, if you add the 94 people, total bookings, and if you go 15 and 26, how much is that? 30, 41. 41 were unloving. And this is just the people who rocked up, 53. Look at the percentage. It's almost half. Now, we spent ages trying to find venues that were of big enough capacity, what we thought would be big enough capacity here. And, you know, we tried to find some in Birmingham where it was closer to everybody's airport and everything to get here if they were flying in. Anyway, we come up with all of these issues and scenarios, and in the end it was getting more and more closer to the time we were going away, so we had to make some decisions, and so we decided here. That's what's here called Linton. And we travelled 23,000 kilometres and were organised enough to get here on the day we said we were going to arrive, right? Not only that, we were organised enough to bring gear with us that took me 6 months to organise. We had to buy it from overseas because they can't buy it in Australia because of the frequencies that we needed to have here when we were here. And so we got all this equipment together and did all of that, raised the funds and all these things to come. And yet people who live here, nearly 50% of them couldn't get here when they had originally booked. So that says, version of love. I can can do anything I want, really, isn't it? But in particular, I can counsel anything I want, and it's not unloving for me to do so. That's the general feeling. Because if a person felt it was unloving in their heart, would they do it? No, of course not. So obviously they believe it's loving. And now, Mary and I know that the average person who rocks up to one of our events is in normal life. So we know already that you're going to be unloving. But it makes it so hard to plan for an event. When there was a potential of 94 people being here and only 53 rock up, we could have got a venue half the size. We could have bought half the speakers, so that there's no consideration. So here's another version of love. I don't have to consider the effect of my decision on anyone else. That's the version of love in this normal life on earth. You follow? I don't have to consider you. All I got to do is think about me. So in other words, selfishness. Average version of love. Now, you can see in this equation, there's a lot of people who think this behaviour is normal, right? And yet, that's why the earth is in the hills, because we think this is all normal sort of behaviour for a person, the average person who believes themselves to be loving. We think it's normal behaviour, so we do it, right? And isn't that interesting? That's just a practical, physical thing of rocking up to a thing you booked. But because it was free, all these other things became possible. So Mary's going, we need to have a booking fee, like type of thing. How do we stop this? How do we stop this from happening? Because
we're both thinking about that.
Well, I'm not, but
I'm not. I don't feel we should have any monetary exchange.
That's right.
About this.
But how do we have a penalty for the people who are so unloving? Because God's laws have a penalty whenever you're unloving. Well, of course, when we think about it, God's law is already working upon those people. You follow? This is an example where the law is quite strict about the fact if a person asks before they'll do something loving, then the law says you didn't do it at all. So if somebody has to ask you to be loving and you are then loving, the law actually measures that as if you weren't loving at all. Right? If you exploit things, the law says there's a penalty for that. Exploitation of others. The law says if you want nursing, the law says there's a penalty for that as well. And the law says this whole idea that I can do anything and I don't have to consider the effect of what I do on you, the law says, no, you do have to consider it, so there's a penalty for that as well. So these people, the 41 people, and most of you probably never considered any of these things either, right? If you're honest with yourself. But those 41 people believe these things are okay, and that's why they are in the hells. You follow? And when they pass, they will be. Just for that reason. Right? Now, of course, there must be a lot of things that happened in their life that caused them to think these things, isn't there? That caused a person to think these things. But God says, you still broke the law. God doesn't care what happened in your life to bring you about to this point where you're unloving to others. The law doesn't care. It just says, you're doing it, you're being unloving to others. In fact, if somebody was unloving to you in your past, surely if you were loving yourself, you would go, wow, people were unloving to me in my past. I don't want to do that to someone else. Surely that's what would be the way we would think. But no, that's not the way we think. We think other people were unloving to me. This is normal. I'm allowed to be unloving to other people too. That's what we think. Do you want to ask? Yep.
Is this worse in the UK than other places?
This has
No.
been our worst venue
So far,
so
no.
far.
But in terms of percentages, no, Portugal
No.
was very bad.
Yeah.
And I've got emails from people from every event that we're going to, either asking me to cancel their ticket for them, asking me to put them on on the waiting list, like lots of things that you can do via the system. And asking me to send me the address, asking
Which
me
is
to
all on the actual screen that you book on.
confirm the start and end times, which is all on the listing. Like, we went to a lot of trouble, the two of us, to really give a lot of information.
So we didn't have to do this.
So that we didn't have
Yeah.
to do those things. So I don't feel it's worse in the UK. No. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rebecca?
And is it this feeling, because the NHS healthcare system in the country loses like hundreds of millions on wasted doctor's appointments, wasted ambulance calls, wasted beds, and yet everyone in the country moans about the free NHS healthcare system and it's being destroyed? Is that the same emotion?
Same emotions, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You will see it happening with every free event that's ever done in England, probably. And we see it with every free event that happens all around the world, to be honest. Yeah, yeah. So these are sort of very dark emotions. And the average person goes, oh, because it was free, there's no penalty for me to not cancel it. I just don't rock up.
Yeah.
No penalty for me. But what about the penalty for the other people? The other people who couldn't go because you'd booked a time slot. So same goes in healthcare. You book a time slot. If you don't rock up, then somebody else missing out on that time slot. That's not loving to the other person. It's actually a sin of omission it's a sin of commission to book something you have no intention of going to. It's a sin of omission to not cancel it soon enough to allow somebody else to go.
Mm. And not going to a doctor's appointment is you also waste, or any appointment, if you like, you're wasting the time of the person who's set aside the time.
There's costs.
There's costs of their wages, of the other person who could have come,
Yep.
the extra money, say in the NHS, that the taxpayer is then paying to provide another appointment to that person who didn't go to the first one. Like, there's many issues.
So you know what's going to happen eventually, don't you?
They want to privatise.
They're going to privatise it. Because of the attitudes that are very unloving, but privatising it just makes it
worse,
more unloving.
Yeah.
Have a look at the US and what's going on there with healthcare. Just makes it more unloving. So, but it's our own fault collectively because of our attitudes, right? At the end of the day, if we had a very loving attitude to the provision of things like that are free, to us, then surely we would be more responsible with the way we use them. Yeah. So you can see this attitude everywhere. It's not just with our events, it's everywhere.
Go ahead.
Go on.
No, I was going to make a point about God. You were going to say
You
something. Oh, it's very hard to receive God's love when you have these attitudes inside of you, because nothing is really a gift. You sort of feel entitled to things.
Yeah, so there's a great level of entitlement in this idea. These ideas are... The trouble with normal life on earth is that it's in the hills, and in the hills you have all of these really bad attitudes, and you don't see... The average person doesn't see them. It's like, huh? Why? Why isn't Mary responding to my email to cancel my ticket? Like, because it would be unloving for her to do so, actually. Yeah.
In the end, I don't know if I should say that. I do cancel those tickets because I think of the other person who might want to take it up.
Yeah.
And the amount of
But
time...
we don't send an email back to the person
saying, I've cancelled your ticket or anything.
Yeah.
But they probably get a notification as I cancel it. But
But it's very unloving, isn't it? Process. That's just for us, though. You also think like our first venue in Belgium cost us 3,200 euros, which is around about, let's put it in Australian dollars, it's around about 5,500 Australian dollars for a 3-day venue for 50 people. So that was 3,300 around about it was, euros.
That was actually it was quite a reasonable price in the area.
That was the most reasonable
was-
we could find,
That was,
which is actually about 5,500 Australian dollars for our hire costs in Belgium. Now, obviously, the Belgium site could only allow us 54 people. So you can see 54 people into that means that it's costing us around about 100 Australian dollars per seat. Here it's costing us about £300 per day for all of your seats. Yesterday we got £40. So you can see we're pretty short by £260 for the seats, just paying for the seat. So here there was $100 Australian per seat being paid in Europe for the 3-day event. So divide that by 3 days, it's $33 a day around about, right, per person. Now you can see that if I go, it's a free event, I don't have to contribute. So who does that? Who pays for the seat? Somebody else is paying for the seat. So we don't even think, am I even willing to pay for my own seat? Like, free event, am I even willing to pay for my own seat? By doing something, like, you don't have to always put money in either, do you, to do something. It's like, if you went to a free event and they said it was a free event, help them clean up. There's going to be rubbish everywhere probably because people are pretty bad when it comes to free events. They put rubbish everywhere as well. So help them clean up or help them do something. Love would motivate me to do these things. But when it's somebody pays for this, and it was myself and Mary that paid for the seat, right? But then it's really interesting. Person comes along and starts arguing with me about what I'm teaching. They're sitting on a seat that I paid for, in a venue that I paid for, and I'm giving my time for free, and they think they're allowed to argue with me. How unloving is that? Like, I understand you've got your own opinions. I understand you've got your own ideas. I don't want to hear them. You want to share your own opinion, your own ideas? Go and get a venue of your own, pay for the seats, and I'll come. But I'm not going to argue with you. Right? Because that would be unloving. Right? But it's amazing to think, so the average person goes, if I don't agree with something, argue about it. Not sit and ponder or contemplate or just think about it or analyse it with love but no, there is an underlying need to just voice a disagreement. Even though the seat is free to the person, and not only is it, so these are, by the way, these are only the higher costs of the event, of the venue. It also cost us nearly €3,000 each to get there, right, to the venue. So now we're talking nearly €10,000 it cost us to get to Belgium to do the event. Now, our total donations for that event was?
oh, I can't remember.
Euro 3,200.
Was it? Yeah.
Now, it cost us $10,000 to get there, €10,000 to get there. So that gives me a shortfall of €6,800. And you know who paid that? One person in Austria. One person. Right? So it's, again, interesting, isn't it? Oh, if people have got money, they should be the one who pay. Another unloving thing here, right? Another unloving attitude is why the average person is in the hells. Another unloving attitude. There are so many unloving attitudes. And remember, God's laws are very strict about these unloving attitudes. So every one of those unloving attitudes has a penalty associated with it. Every one of them attracts certain types of spirits. Remember exactly what I said here. Every one of them demonstrates a level of evil. Every one of them demonstrates how lawless the individual is. Every one of them has a penalty associated with it. Every one of them attracts dark spirits. How many dark spirits do you think there are encouraging no one to rock up at our events?
Many.
There's millions, millions. So we often have people say, I'm just getting too attacked, I can't come. And I'm going, well, if you just respond to a dark spirit's motivation to attack you by doing what the dark spirit wanted you to do, what do you think the next result's going to be? Isn't it more dark spirits going, we can just tell her to attack her a bit and she won't go.
She'll do whatever we want. Yep.
She'll do whatever we want. So can you see how all of these things happen? And it's even on these tiny little things. Like, this is just one event that's happening in the world. There's 8 billion people doing things every day in the world. And we're only like, 50 or 60 of us here. And there's another nearly 8 billion people out there doing all sorts of things. And if 50% of us are like this, it doesn't look good for the earth, does it? But you look at what God provides on earth, everything God provides is free. The oxygen you breathe is free. And what do we do with it? Exploit it. We dirty the oxygen we breathe. Because it's free. It doesn't cost us anything to dirty it, so we dirty it. We pump out huge amounts of pollution. We put heaps of garbage into the sea. We stop the natural ways the ecology changes and fixes itself and repairs itself by damaging it. We don't think of anything because it's all free. But I bet you if you had to pay $1,000 every time you did some damage to the environment, right, you'd start reconsidering your actions. But isn't that sad? The very environment we live in is free, and we go ahead and just damage it more and damage it more and damage it more because of the same attitude. Exploit whatever is free. Right? Oxygen's free. The very thing we need. Water is free. Is it free for you? No. What's happened there? God provided it for free, and somebody gets the gift for free and says, we can make money off of this. So let's provide water in an unloving bottle, plastic one, and that's going to be damage to the environment. And then also let's charge more than it costs to have the same thing made out of something else. So like Coke, which is also water, but the water costs more than a Coke. In Australia, the water costs 4 times more than a Coke for the same volume. Like, something's going wrong there, yeah? Something that's God provided for free, we are damaging, and then on top of the fact that we are damaging, it's essential for life, not as essential as oxygen, obviously. You don't have oxygen, it's going to be a few minutes and you die. You don't have water, though, a few days, and you're going to die, right? So something that God provided for free, which is essential to human life, and we've monetized it. That's how unloving we are. We monetize everything, anything that's essential for human life, because we can make more money off of it than anything that's not essential for human life, because everybody has to use the thing that's essential. So you make more money from it. So let's monetize the whole thing. How unloving is that? Whoever dreamed up that idea, and then whoever followed along with the idea and thought it was a great idea, how unloving are they? It's a silly, silly idea, right? It's not in harmony with love. But this is how far we go, because this is what we classify as normal life on earth. And we're prepared as a society to accept it even. We're prepared to not protest it. Or when I say protest, I don't mean like unloving protest where everybody gets out like what's happened here in the last few weeks, right? I mean a loving thing where we're saying, no, this is wrong, and none of us should agree with this, right? But we don't, because we're scared of conflict and scared of people condemning us now because we're, disagreeing with the most of society and so forth. Because it would be good if we did that, but everybody in society thinks, no, whenever you're afraid, that's bad. So don't do anything you're afraid of, which means don't do anything to confront unloving behaviour in anybody else, basically. So in other words, just accept the unloving behaviour. Well, that's unloving, actually. It's unloving to accept unloving behaviour. That's unloving too. So I can't do that if I want to be loving. I can't accept the unloving behaviour. I have to make at least some comment about it, which is the reason why I'm making this comment now about it. Do you follow? Because it's unloving behaviour and I can't accept it. Now, Mary and I are going to keep providing our seminars for free because God's truth was given to us free, so it needs to be given to you free. But you can see the lack of love in most people causes them to think that they can exploit even that, right? Now, how many of you thought about this before you came to the event? Like, thought about these things? Not many. A few of you I know do, but not many of us. And that's because we've come to accept that what society says is love is good enough. And isn't that sad? Because if we accept what society says is good enough, then it's probably going to mean we're going to get more of it. Right? Because nobody's saying, no, we've got to be better than this. As a group of people, we need to be better than this. Yeah. So it's very, very tricky, isn't it, to even, you look at God provides all these things for free, and look what the people on earth are doing to those free things. It's like monetizing everything. One day you're going to be paying for your oxygen, I'm sure. Mm. Yep. In some ways you already are, because the carbon neutral things where you have to pay for something to become carbon neutral. Why do you have to pay for something to be carbon? Shouldn't it already be carbon neutral? Why do we have to pay for it to be? If all of us were living a life where we planted enough trees and we lived in an environment where we could, where there's enough oxygen being produced, then we wouldn't have to pay for something to be carbon neutral. And many of us go down here in this area of love, which is normal life, which is not loving at all. We go, I can do the unloving thing because I paid for it to be carbon free. But you didn't pay for it. Somebody else did the work. Is that loving? That you only have to fork over some money because you're wealthy to somebody else, and then they can do the work for you so you don't have to do the work? Isn't that lacking self-responsibility? Well, of course it is. From God's perspective, it's unloving. So so the reason why I've raised this as an issue is because you can see the average person on earth, and even the average person who attends our events, doesn't know what love is. Does not know what love is yet. So how do we change that? It's a tricky question, isn't it? Because if you're really concerned about what's going on earth and you're concerned about things that are happening in your own life, the only thing that's really going to change anything is for everybody to get more in harmony with love and law, and then we'll all experience the reward from doing that. We'll be rewarded for doing that. That's the only way things are going to actually change. And by the way, that also applies for all the spirits in hell as well. The only way their life's going to change is if they bring their life into more harmony with love and law. It's the same principle. That's the only way it's going to change. So even these dark spirits, all they really are is people who still feel that the earth's normal life is loving. They just died and they continue in the same feelings and beliefs that it's loving. Does that make sense? And so that's all they are. The dark spirits, that's all they are. So when we talk about dark spirits, we can feel in many of you go, yeah, the main reason why I did that unloving thing was because of the dark spirits with me. But that's not true. The main reason why you do an unloving thing is because of the darkness within you. And those dark spirits can only influence you if they've got some tangible thing inside of you to manipulate in some way or another, right? So we've got to stop blaming dark spirits for what they influence you to do. At some point, the only way you're going to disconnect, and at some point you're going to have to disconnect, is by making sure that your passion in life is to live in harmony with love and law. That's the only way you're going to disconnect from them. So like I said earlier, many of you have 2 or 3 of these spirits influencing your life, influencing your addictions. Some of you are like regularly taking drugs like marijuana, coffee, whatever. Some of you are regularly just hardly living a life where you share, where you act in harmony with love of others. In other words, some of you just are very selfish with your life. You don't help anybody in your life. Like, don't decide to try to help and assist other people. And then others of you have got issues with family and friends where you don't want to speak up, and you have a terrible lack of love of self in that place, right? Where you don't want to speak up and live the life you know is going to be better for you because of all the people who may attack you for that. So that's you living in harmony with fear. And fear is what people believe is justified in normal life. The average person feels if you're afraid, it means you don't have to do it. If you're afraid, it means that anything you're planning, you don't have to actually finish up doing. Right? The average person on earth believes that. But God, that's not God's standard. God said, God's standard is, I don't care if you're afraid. You damn well do the right thing, otherwise the law's going to have its result, right? Whether you're afraid or not. God's law doesn't go, Jesus was afraid. I'll let him get away with that. That's not how the law works. Right? So we've got to stop valuing fear as a motivation for being unloving, and we've got to choose to be loving even when we're afraid. So that means, many of us are afraid to be truthful. So the loving thing is to be truthful. So the Lord doesn't care whether you're afraid to be truthful. It's saying, be truthful, otherwise there's a penalty. So you've got to learn to be truthful even though you're afraid. And to be honest, if you do that, you'll feel your fear better. And if you're humble, you'll work through your fear and you'll get to the point where you're truthful and you're not afraid. That's what will happen. But if you use fear as a justification, then really you're just accepting that this hellish life that we have on earth, this thing we call normal life, you're accepting the restrictions it's placing on you and saying that's my justification for my own unloving behaviour. And it's not a justification, right, from God's perspective. All right, should we go up the back? Thank you.
So I have my son, this cute little boy, and since before we came here, I've been.
I'm not hearing you clearly.
Yeah,
so.
I can hear. Yeah, if you just hold it a bit closer to you.
Is that better?
That's better.
That's better, yeah.
Okay. So I have my son here, the cute little boy.
Yep.
And since before we came here and during the talk, I'm terrified about him making noise.
Yep.
And it caused me to miss a lot of the talk yesterday and today.
Yep.
Because I took him outside so there
Yep.
wouldn't be noise.
Yep.
So one question is, like, because I feel that it's a little bit like I wanted to do the loving thing,
Yep.
but I was actually terrified about not doing
The loving
Yes.
thing.
the unloving
Yeah, I
thing.
get you. I get you.
Good
Well,
question.
what was your name? Sorry.
Ido.
Ido.
Ido. Well, Ido, firstly, it's very loving for you to take your son outside when he's making noise, because then everybody else can hear. And also we have recordings and then everybody there can hear. So that's a very loving thing to do. The good question, though, is from God's perspective is, if you're afraid and that's why you did it, from God's perspective, it's you weren't driven by love. You were driven by fear to do it. Now, from God's perspective, that's like you weren't loving. You were just driven by fear. You follow?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, sometimes we can do this. We can take what seems to be a loving action, but the motivation is not loving. Right? So the motivation was fear. If the motivation is fear, then the motivation is not loving. And therefore, the law measures the motivation as well as the action. So you did a loving thing in the sense it would be defined as loving to not have noise for the rest of the people. And by the way, we have recordings for this exact purpose, so any person with children can just go out whenever they want and come back whenever they want, and they're not going to miss out because we've got a recording. You know, that's the reason why we do recordings. But in doing it out of fear, that's the problem, because that's not a loving thing to do it out of fear, right? It's more loving if you just did it because you love people and you go, right, he's making racket, I got to take him out.
Yeah, but then in order to confront the fear, I would have to do unloving things.
No, you don't have to do unloving things to confront fear.
How would you suggest that I...
Well, how would you confront the fear of, what's the motivation? So you think about your motivation as to why you felt that taking him out, you had to take him out of fear. What was the feeling in you about that? Can you feel what it was?
I think I was afraid about you guys being angry.
Well, have you ever seen me angry in a group? Online, or like all of our groups are, the whole thing's recorded generally. Have you ever seen me angry?
No, but I did hear you talk about unloving people, and I don't want to be one of those people.
Okay. So the real problem.
After this talk, though, we know we're all unloving people. But anyway,
Yeah.
not to get you away from
Not to get you away from it. But so the real problem was the feeling of potentially feeling like you're going to get shamed,
Yes.
isn't it? Which actually comes from, like, I'm not into shaming people. The whole reason for saying all this was not to shame people, it's just to point out a fact. And that is almost everybody on earth is in the hells. That's the fact. And I'm just giving you an example of how that's a fact, right? So it's not for the point of shaming anybody, it's for the purpose of making you aware, actually, that this is a fact. So, but your fear of being shamed obviously comes from childhood issues in your own life, right, where you were shamed and you've not let it go yet. All right, so the way to lovingly confront it is to put yourself in situations where you might be shamed, but when you're doing a loving thing. So what would you do there? So an example of that is there's a truth you need to speak up for, but you feel ashamed, and so you don't speak up. So if you wanted to confront that issue, you would speak up instead. And whatever shame people heaped on you, you would bring it on. I did the right thing. So I'm not suggesting that you do the wrong thing as a way of triggering emotion. The way to trigger emotion properly is actually to do the loving thing in harmony with the law. And then the sinful emotion will be exposed. Make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the correct action is when we know there's a sinful emotion inside of us, the correct action would be to do the loving thing and to do it in truth and in harmony with humility, and let whatever happens around me happens to trigger whatever emotion I have inside of me.
So I need to find the loving things to do that would trigger the
Correct.
emotion.
That's what you need to do.
Right.
Yeah. So you know the shame exists. You know the fear of shame exists as well. And the fear of shame exists because the shame exists and you haven't felt it yet. So from your childhood. So the fear, you end up afraid of that shame. So you know those two things exist. So the best way to confront it is in a loving manner. Not in an unloving one. Because in an unloving one, you will feel guilty afterwards as well, because the law will punish you. So you don't want to do the unloving thing in order to deal with an emotion that you know is unloving.
That makes total sense. Thank you.
No worries. All right. Are there... Yep, let's go across.
Billy, if you just go across
Billy
to the end of the
across
row.
end there. Yeah, thank you, Billy. And then we'll come down to Tim here. Yep. Yep.
I am very afraid to ask this. I've been in a situation where I was very triggered, and it's in public. So I asked, and it was given, and I was very, very challenged. And I met a person that is have tried to harm me in the past, but I was on the way to the gym. So how do I deal with the fear that I had when I was in a public space? What is the loving way? Because I often also feel very sad when I'm in a public,
Yep.
or when I'm surrounded by people that are not loving.
Yep. Well, very firstly, we must say that the addiction to be private with dealing with your problems is an unloving addiction. So do you understand what I mean by that? The world sort of thinks all of your unloving behaviour, all of your actions should be all dealt with in private, and the addiction to deal with it in private is to do with the fact that we don't want to be exposed in public, right? So I'm not suggesting in public that you should deal with your feelings. What I'm saying is the addiction to do it in private is a problem. Now, to illustrate that, what I mean is, let's say in public you do something to harm me, right? And I feel, let's say I'm embarrassed, right? If I'm unwilling to feel my embarrassment in public, then it's likely what I will do is I'll start wanting to defend myself or even attack you, because I will perceive what you did to me as an attack, because I'm not owning my own feelings, my own addictions. But if I own my own feelings, I'm prepared to just sit there and be embarrassed, right? I'm prepared to be humble enough to be able to cope with being embarrassed. There are many times Mary and I feel quite embarrassed. When one person came up, where was it, in Austria, and he bowed down to me like a, what? I found that very embarrassing. It's like he's thinking I'm Jesus, got to bow down to Jesus or whatever, and I'm going, get up, what's wrong with you? I'm just a person, and why are you doing this? There's something wrong. Why are you doing this? But it was embarrassing, like other people watched and saw and felt quite embarrassing to me. But I can just feel my embarrassment in public and just still, because I'm feeling my embarrassment, I can now be loving to the person. So I grabbed him and said, stand up. I'm your brother. I gave him a hug. You don't treat me like that, is what I said to him. And if you're embarrassed, you can feel your embarrassment in public. There's no problem with feeling your embarrassment in public. Now, let's say the embarrassment is so strong that you start crying. And then after a while, you connect with something and you're crying very loudly. Do you know what I mean? Well, then, of course, the polite thing to do would be to withdraw and go to a place where people are not going to be bothered by you feeling your emotion, and that you're not imposing your emotion upon the space. So another thing I don't do is I don't sit in front of people crying or screaming or carrying on with my emotions. I go and deal with those things in private, because it's not loving for me to do it. Even with Mary around, I'm going, if I'm starting to cry, like I say, Mary, I'll just go to my room, feel my feelings. So Mary can get on with doing other things in her life rather than being bothered with my noise. You follow? So I don't do that out of embarrassment. I do that out of love for Mary. You follow? So in every situation, love can be considered, and it doesn't matter how damaged you are and whatever emotions you've got to deal with. If you're humble, you'll consider love in the process, but also be humble in the moment. Yeah? And you're capable of doing that. Everybody is. Tim?
I was wanting to ask about the free seats, or like the free venue. If you made like a fee and the people that don't come have to pay the fee, and the people that do come, they have to get refunded. Or?
We thought about it, Tim.
Okay.
We were thinking about, like, how do we create a system that's loving, that, you know, where there is some penalty, kind of trying to reflect God's laws, where there's a penalty for just the lack of love, but nothing on the people who love. But we both feel like there shouldn't be any monetary, even there you have to have money up front in order to come, and that feels like it's limiting some people.
What about the people who are really poor and...
Yeah. So it doesn't feel right. And also, I think what Jesus just did is the best way to deal with it, really. Educate people, what's involved, what the time. We probably could do more to educate people about the time, effort and energy that we put into even finding locations and setting up things. But just educating people about their sinful feelings, is probably the biggest thing we can do.
It's the only solution.
Yeah.
The only solution is to educate people. Mary and I, in our love for you, we want to make sure when you come there's a seat. So if 90 people are booked, we're going to try to make sure there's 95 seats, or more seats.
Always more than booked. We accommodate.
Try to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason why that is that if you have to sit on the floor for 5 hours listening, it's very hard. You're not going to be able to hear for that amount of time. So if we do have an environment, and sometimes we do at home have an environment where everybody's just sitting out in the backyard, on the floor, on the ground, on the grass, or we often do teaching at home where we've all been working, and then at lunchtime from midday to 2, we do some teaching, and all of us it's sitting out on the ground and everything, in our work clothes. And that kind of environment, we know that if we go too long, everyone's going to get more and more uncomfortable. So obviously we try to keep it to a certain length so people don't get that uncomfortable. So we're always trying to think about how what we choose to do is going to impact your ability to actually feel and process anything about what we're talking about. So that's one reason why we wanted a whiteboard. Because of me explaining, you imagine me trying to explain that without a whiteboard. It'd be hard, wouldn't it? Like, I would say it all and then you'd have nothing to look at.
Yeah.
And in terms of learning, how hard is that? That's like, I've got to now remember what, and where does that go in the picture of things and everything. Having a words as well as a picture is a much more effective manner of teaching. So that's why we like to use a whiteboard. But I don't want to use a tech device, right? We've already got too much tech. Well, I don't want to use more tech to display something. Because if any one of those things fails, then I'm having to look at the tech and work out the tech rather than just share truth with you. And also on top of that, this is more interactive. This is more like it evolves as we go, right? So this is why we don't use tech, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And when they do go wrong, everyone's lost the important thing, you know, the important description that we need to retain. So we have chosen to teach the way we teach for many, many reasons. And every one of those reasons is based around how can we love you more? Like how can we make it? So for an example is, we looked at a lot of venues and they had hard wooden seats. And I know if it was me sitting on a hard wooden seat for 5 hours, at the end of 5 hours I'm going to be thinking more about my bottom than I am about what's going on. And I know that's how it's going to be for you too, right? You're going to go, oh, everything's numb and it really hurts, right? So we want to get comfortable seats for you. That's one of the things, one of the criteria we look for a venue. Another one was we know that many of you had to drive here. See, if we were in the middle of Birmingham, which we did try to get some venues there, if we were there, there'd be less worry because many of you could taxi or whatever else, but many of you can't. So, being out in the sticks a bit compared to that. So we know there's going to have to be a car park. We're looking at all the venues that are being offered and we're going, yeah, I get on Google Earth and zoom into the venue and look what's around the venue. Is there car parking enough for what I would estimate there to be 50 cars or whatever? Is there car parking enough? We do all of that, and the main reason why we do all that is we're trying to think about you, like what is going to be for you being here. Is it going to be easy enough for you? And that's bearing in mind that we've travelled tens of thousands of kilometres to be here, right? And we know many of you have only travelled a couple of hundred, well, here it's miles, isn't it, to be here. And for us, a couple of hundred miles is like Australia, that's like an afternoon jaunt sort of thing. When Mary goes shopping, we do 100 kilometres, like just to go shopping. So for us, those kind of distances don't mean much, but when we go to Europe, we know for you guys, it's pretty rare that you go 100 kilometres or 200 kilometres somewhere. We know that. So we're trying to also allow for that as well. And so once you start feeling about love, you start feeling about love in all the different aspects. How can I physically make your life more comfortable? How can I, make your life more comfortable sexually in the sense of not projecting sexually, not allowing projection sexually, not having any sexual demands on anybody. The only person that I have a sexual relationship with is Mary, and that's going to be forever. It's not just as a lot of the media contend it's I'll trade her in for a new model at some point, and
We're getting a bit grey.
it's more likely she'll trade me in, right? Because I'm getting old. But it's like these kind of things, and when it comes to emotions, are we allowing an environment where emotions are not being dumped on people and they can just feel instead for themselves? For that reason, we don't have music at our events generally because, the only time we have music at any event is to tell people to come in. We just turn on some music and people come in, then we turn off the music. That's the only time we've ever had music because we don't want to create a mood. The reason why we don't want to create a mood is because it's loving for you to have your own mood.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like you come with your own mood and that's the mood you need to feel, well, the one you come with. So there's a whole heap of things we're considering when we set up an event. And the main reason why we consider all those things is because we know that if we can make the event as loving as we can and as considerate as we can for you, then also not only do you get loving teachings, but you also get an example of what love would do in practice. And this is helpful for education, isn't it? On top of that, we love you, and so we want to think of you. We want to think of, well, what's the best thing for you guys in order to learn? And so frequently Mary and I come to a location, we go, oh, Spirit's here, we can feel the people here, and we go, we think we will talk about that, and then we get into the conversation a little bit like we did yesterday, and I'm going, this isn't working. So we've got to change. We can feel it's not working. Can you feel most of you are more engaged now than you were yesterday? Yeah? You're already more engaged than you were yesterday. And it's because we're being more honest about what's going on, and also more honest about what pulls in the spirits as well. And so what happened yesterday was our spirit friends could hardly help any spirit with you at all. The spirits weren't able to be detached from you for any length of time because of the addictions and because of other factors, and because not facing this issue of law. And today we thought, well, how do we help? See, in every event we have, there's like usually millions of spirits, and how do we help them as well as you? So we're also thinking about that as well. And so we try to change, not just for your sake, but also for theirs, in terms of what we discuss. So once I discuss this, huge numbers of spirits have been able to be helped in the spirit world that weren't able to be helped yesterday. We were getting too bogged down yesterday in all the little personal questions, the personal issues, rather than talking about principles that everybody can apply, right? And on top of that, we're not facing the sin, because this is why I had this conversation with you, is to start facing where we're at. Because the world is there and we're not far removed from it. If you were far removed from it, you'd be like us. You'd be attacked every day. The media would attack you every day. People who are in your life would attack you every day if you were more like us. Something to look forward to. Well, it is in a way, because it means you're doing better. Does that make sense? You're doing better than the average. Yeah? So I sort of look upon attack as, oh, it's good that's happening. That proves that we're on the right track. Yeah? Rather than being on the wrong track, So these are things you think about when you feel loving towards people, right? You're not going to be guided by your fears. You're not going to be guided by your desire to fit in with the world. So in the first century, I used to say a lot, be no part of the world. You can live in the world and be no part of it, right? And this is what I meant, because if you're a part of the world and you fit in with the world, it means you're in the same condition as the world, right? And if you look at the world's condition, it's not very good. What amazes me is the average person looks at the world condition and says, I'm better than that. So I find that quite hypocritical and also not very self-analytical, actually, because it's like you're living in the world and everyone around you is okay with you. If that's the case, then it probably means you're in the same condition as they are. Right? And that's not good. You look where the world's headed, it's not good, right? It's not good on a lot of levels. We're getting more and more violence. There's more and more war. There's more and more environmental destruction. There's more and more medically manufactured diseases. There's more and more, the world is getting to be a mess, right? And it's because of the love issue. That's why. There's no other reason than the lack of love. That's why. Yeah.
When we come to a group, how can we help to make the group more loving?
Great question. Yeah. The way you make something more loving is you come in with an open-hearted desire to learn. So if you think about children, we see very young children, and those of you who have had children, you will know that when they're quite young, once they get past the stage of just, it's all just body functions, wee, poo, eat, drink, whatever, and they get to a stage where they are able to be reasoned with, which often begins quite young. Like you can begin reasoning with a child, usually anywhere from about 7 months onwards. You can start that process. Most people don't until they're 2 or 3, but you can start a lot earlier. But once you can start reasoning with the child starts asking questions. Says, "Daddy, you know, what's the sun? How does the sun work?" And you go, the average parent goes, "Oh, I don't know, son. Let me look it up. Let me go and investigate it." But if you think about it, a child is that young and they're asking very intelligent questions that the average adult can't even really answer. Why is the sky blue? You know, that kind of question. So they're asking about the world around them. And they are open to receiving an answer without judgment and without criticism. What they do is they are in this sort of state, aren't they, where they ask and then they receive and then they feel about it. But that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, Dad. You know, that kind of thing. So, you know, like if Dad said, you know, years ago they used to believe this, the sun is on the back of 2 elephants and, you know, that kind of thing. Well, the average person looking up says, "I can't see the elephants, Dad." You know, so he's going to ask more questions because he's felt about it and he's analysed the answer and going, "There's something wrong with this answer because I can feel there's something wrong with the answer," right? But he doesn't criticise even then, does he? He's still in a place of, "But that doesn't make sense," type of feeling, not in a place of, "You're dead wrong." That's, you know, not totally like critical about the whole thing. He's open to receive. Now, if the average person who heard divine truth came with that spirit, can you see that also bring with them a posse of spirits? You know, because remember, every person has spirits around them. This person has spirits around him, so every person has spirits around him. So that brings spirits who are also in this questioning state. So you imagine the atmosphere then, right? You could feel, can't you, the atmosphere would be very good. It would be very conducive to learning, very conducive to helping you understand better, and so forth. So the key is to be in a childlike state when it comes to receiving truth, which is really, if you look at it's not there anymore. Remember the 5 things I mentioned. Humility is one of those things. So if you come into place with a humble state, that is going to mean the atmosphere around you is going to remain in a humble state. Then that atmosphere is going to influence other people into a humble state. And if everybody in the room's in a humble state, when we share truth, it actually is no effort to share truth to a room that's humble at all. In fact, as Mary knows, very enjoyable, isn't it, babe?
Yeah. We've had times like that in Australia in the past year, haven't we, where just the conversation kept going and going from lunchtime till after dinner time, and it was like no time was passing because everyone was in this state of like just seeking and interest and reflective. And
so when Mary and I talk to a group that's very resistive, it takes quite a lot of energy to do 5 hours of talking to a group that's resistive. But if you start talking to a group that's not resistive, 5 hours pass and you go, "Where did that go?" You know, it's like it's a breeze to talk to those people. So yes, bring along a state where you're open to receiving more truth, no matter how confronting it is. That's one of the best ways. So that means bring along a humble state, doesn't it? Not a fighting state or I'm there, you know, he's saying he's Jesus, I've got to criticise all this. Well, you don't have to really. Like I've, 2,000 years, I've had a lot of criticism. You don't really need to add to it. I've heard most of it. There's so many times when I've gone to someone in the spirit world and they've asked for Jesus to come, so I've come and I've said I'm Jesus, and they go, "What?" Because they don't expect me to be like I am. So there's many times that's happened, and millions of times actually that's actually happened. You imagine there's a lot of Christians on the planet who ask for Jesus after they pass, and if they're sincere, which often they're not, but if they are, then I'll go. And if I feel they're sincere, I'll go. And then I rock up and they go, huh? You're like, where's the right hand of God? And why aren't you God? And this surely isn't what God looks like. And, you know, there's all sorts of criticisms and everything. So I'm used to people criticising me for all sorts of things. And I've had thousands of years of it. But, you know, if you're open, then you've got the capacity to receive. Yeah? But if you're closed, it doesn't matter what people give you as a gift, you won't receive it, you know? And many of you have heard that illustration, right? If you've got a hand-fisted, somebody gives you something, you can't pick it up, can you? You know, it's the same principle in your heart, really, isn't it? If you've got a closed heart, somebody shares something with you, it's not going to enter. And of course, everything divine truth has to enter your heart, not your head. So there's many people who sort of think that they are in a good state when they come, but actually their heart is quite shut down. So the key is to open your heart, your feelings, right? Now, many people feel when I say that to them that I'm a dangerous cult leader now, influencing people to open their heart to things that they're not sure of. And the reality is that you do need to open your heart to everything you're not sure of, but you still also need to be able to evaluate it just like the child would. Yeah.
The idea that we protect ourselves from holding back ideas is not it's not based on logic. You know, oh, I won't listen to any new idea or any new thought and that will protect me. Actually, it makes you more unsafe, really, because you're limiting your access to truth. And you're saying also, I can't find truth. I can't discern truth.
Yeah, you're actually displaying your inability to have some self-confidence in your ability to analyse.
And if you don't have confidence in your ability to analyse, you need to develop that.
Yeah.
That's very important for your future life.
Yeah, we'd encourage you to develop that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just straight away here and then over to Phil on this side. Yeah.
Hello again. I'm Philippa.
Yep.
A question about spirit influence. I feel like I'm getting a lot of influence not to ask this question.
Okay.
I guess personally, I feel I get some influence to not. I sometimes help people with dealing with their emotions.
Yeah.
I get a lot of shutdown and negative influence. So I guess the question is how to deal with the influence as we're trying to move the other side of the line, and also how to deal with spirit attack.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you feel in yourself that you're quite afraid of spirit attack?
Yes.
Yeah. And this is the main problem many of you face, is that when we start talking about spirits, many of you start thinking of them almost like as if they're monsters. Do you know what I mean? And it is true that there are many spirits that are quite dark and evil, and they are quite sort of monstrous in a way, but they are just people. They are people who've lived on earth before, and now they're in the spirit world. And they died for whatever reason, and they've got their own problems just like you have, right? So the very first way to deal with these influences, the dark spirit influences, is to firstly understand that they are just normal people, right? And they have normal problems and they act as the average person on earth does, quite unlovingly. That's where they are. The beauty of understanding that is that you can then, instead of viewing them as a monster, you can view them as a person with problems, right? Rather than being monsters, right? Our spirit friends, if you want to call them that, many of them are not very friendly.
We can call them brothers and sisters.
We can call them our brothers and sisters. Yeah. They have their own personal problems, and their condition of love will demonstrate how they behave with those personal problems. Just like a person on earth will behave badly under certain circumstances because of certain personal problems, so too will a spirit in the spirit world. If I understand that and have some compassion for them, a lot of spirits who are dark spirits don't want you to feel compassion for them. What they want you to feel is what?
Fear.
Fear first. So fear first. And then usually when you don't want to feel fear, what happens? You get angry. They don't mind that either, because you can be quite influenced whether you're afraid or you're angry, you know. So an example is when you're afraid, you can be pushed into doing things you didn't really want to do, but you feel like you have to do because you're afraid. When you're angry, you can be just triggered by somebody pushing the button of your anger that causes you to go and do something unloving. So in either place, you can be quite manipulated, whether you're in fear or anger. For yourself, the main feeling is fear, right? Yep. So whenever a spirit gets around you, you're not really assessing why they're there or anything else, because already you're afraid. Emotionally, you're afraid. So the very first thing you're going to need to do is deal with your fear of them. But they are just people who are not in a good place, just like many people you meet in the street, right? That's all they really are. And if you have compassion for them, that's not fear. Now, most spirits who want power over people on earth want you to be in fear. In order to control you, they need one of three things: codependence, fear, or rage from you. That's what they need. So codependence meaning they need you to need something that they need. So it's like a drunk man in the spirit world. He needs a drinker on earth. He needs to connect to somebody who's an alcoholic and get him to drink more. That's what he needs.
Or they need you to want something that they promise, and that you will give them something in return, like classical codependence on earth.
Yeah. So codependence is a large reason why people get influenced on earth. So an example of that, let's say the question you asked was about emotion. Now, a person who doesn't want to feel their emotion is going to be codependent with a spirit who doesn't want to feel emotion. So the reality is, when you're working with somebody who doesn't want to feel emotion, you're going to have to work with more than one person at the same time, because you're going to have to work with the spirit who doesn't want to feel emotion and the person who doesn't want to feel emotion. So while you're working with the person in the physical, you can also talk to the spirit and try to help them to work through their thing as well. But if you're afraid of them, you won't do that, obviously, right? You won't do that. So the first thing the spirit wants is codependence, these darker spirits I'm talking about. The second thing they want is outright fear. Fear gives them an adrenaline hit of power. So when you get afraid, they feel powerful. It's like a person on earth who's abusive. Like if I was an abusive male, the way to make Mary do whatever I want is to make her afraid, right? And then she's so afraid, I'll just want her to do something and she'll go and do it, right? And the spirits know that, so they like people who want power, like you feeling afraid, right? So if you're in a state of fear with regard to spirits, you would need to deal with that. You need to feel your fear, work through your fear, so you're no longer in fear.
Because the reality is you're not going to feel compassion for them while you're afraid. Like, you can't fake that. You have to deal with some feelings to get to that state, don't you?
Yeah. Yep. Then with regard to anger, when you get angry, obviously you become very uncontrolled. And the reason why you're angry is because an addiction's not getting met. So spirits like that because they want you to meet the addiction that they want you to meet. So a lot of them like your anger, because what it does is it helps them meet addictions through you. So what would you do there? Well, you would have to look at your addictions that drive your anger, like your expectations, your demands. And that's, if you do with those three things, you'll not be bothered by dark spirits ever again.
Thank you.
So it's quite simple. Of course, what's actually happening on Earth at the moment is that huge numbers of people are bothered by dark spirits all the time. In this audience, you've got probably, from what I can see, you've got probably 10 of the younger men are all bothered by abusive dark spirits, right?
At least.
At least. And then you've got, most of the women in the audience are also bothered by abusive male spirits. And a couple of you in the audience, men, are actually in league with power-mad male spirits. And then a lot of you are dominated by family spirits who have the same family-based injuries as you have as well. So, yeah. But all of those relationships would disappear if you dealt with those three things.
Yeah. Yep. And the thing about spirit, like Jesus said, spirits are people. They're just people. Some people can see these people that are in their spirit form. Most people at this point on earth can't see them, but they are people. And what I've found with spirit attack and spirit influence is that those spirits who I've been open to their attack or open to their influence, they were just they were hooking into injuries in me, and I had the same patterns in relationships with people on earth. And, you know, if you understand that, then you can deal with the relationships with people on earth in a humble manner. It will help you with the spirits. You can deal with the spirits in a humble manner. It will help you with the relationships on earth. It's the same soul that you have and the same soul condition that you can change.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good day.
I had another question, but might not be appropriate for the topic.
Is it off topic?
It's related to sin and the effect on
Well, that's on
soulmate.
topic. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so how sin accumulated by one half of the soul affects the other
Yeah,
half
not
of
at
the
all.
soul?
No.
Not at all.
Not at all. We had this question.
We had this question in Portugal, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not at all. The main reason why, if I can illustrate why, is when you incarnate, so you start like this, right? So yours is stop asking.
Yes.
What is yours, I should say?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so when you incarnate, obviously there's this feeling, see, in the union state before you incarnate, you're not conscious at all. There's no consciousness, no self-awareness, no awareness of anything else around you. There is some instinctual things that you know you need to do, but even that's not a knowledge. It's just an automatic thing, just like any other instinctual thing. And the instinct of the soul is to incarnate. So incarnate means it needs to split in two halves, right? And join to the two bodies that are created at conception, so spirit body and a physical body, which are both created at conception. And the soul knows it needs to do that process, right? That's all it really knows. So it's not aware of this duality. So when you first come, you're not actually, there's no soul-based awareness of the duality, the fact that you're two halves, right? At this stage, you're thinking you're just one half, one person. Of course, that happens to the other half at some point, whether it's before or after you, is dependent on a lot of different laws operating, and we can't go into those right now. But it's spirit body, physical body. Now, because of the condition that you weren't aware, it's fundamentally the way it feels, emotionally feels, is that you're like that and he's like that. You follow? In other words, there's this sort of separation that exists emotionally because you're having two separate emotional experiences. The goal of the reason why God really created that way is so that there's two chances to discover yourself rather than just one. See, if it was just one, then you'd have to, if the one person didn't have a linkage to another in any way, then if it was just one half having to go through the experience by itself, then you'd have to discover everything yourself. So you'd have to discover masculinity and femininity. You'd have to discover, so there would probably be no feminine body or masculine body under those circumstances either. So God created the process because if you're into separate bodies, as you go through the life experience on earth, there's certain things that get triggered from the soul and also from the bodies that trigger you into action in your life. And so an example of that is puberty. Puberty triggers you into thinking about somebody else. Make sense? A lot of children, you know that, don't you? A lot of children, when they're very, very young, hardly think about anybody else at all. And then over time, they get to think about other people like mum and dad and sisters and brothers, and they have to work with them. And then they go to school and whatever, and they have friends, and they have to think of them. And so they're growing in their you could say their expression of love is growing, but they don't think about a partner, like a other half of themselves, until usually they start puberty, and then they start feeling like, I want to be with somebody else, like in a relationship, a sexual relationship. So the development sexually aids the soul to become conscious that it's a half of another. Does that make sense to you? Right, but while it's imbibing its injuries and not conscious of the other, its injuries have to be dealt with by the half of the soul, not the whole soul. So the reality is actually that one half of the soul can become a celestial spirit, which is in the 8th sphere of the spirit world, and the other half can be in the hells in terms of their loving condition. But of course, you think about it, if you're in the hells and then your soulmate's in the 8th sphere, it's going to be a lot easier for you to get to the 8th sphere if your soulmate's already there, isn't it? Because they're going to come and visit you. They're going to want to be with you at some point. They're going to want to recognise you. They'll come to spend time with you. You might not even know that they're your soulmate for many, many years while they're doing this, but they'll know because they know who their soulmate is before you did, because they're in a higher condition of love than you are, so they will know. And then they will come, and eventually you'll become aware, And so this gives you the opportunities to change and even to receive God's love that you would not otherwise have it. Every soul's got 2 opportunities to receive God's love, not just one. 2, because there's 2 different halves that can both receive. And once one half receives, the other half of the soul benefits. Yeah? So God's created it this way so that firstly there would be no pain when you incarnate, aside from the pain that your parents cause you. There's no pain from the loss of the memory of your other half, none at all. You will go through a process of individualization, which defines who you are. And in the process of that, if you continue to grow, receiving God's love, you'll eventually get joined back with your soulmate, but both of you will be conscious of yourselves. You'll be conscious of who you are, what you want out of life, your personality, your nature. And you'll also have to have developed a character in harmony with love as a part of that process, because development is something that each half of the soul also needs to do by themselves while they're growing together. So in other words, if Mary was in the 8th sphere and I'm in the 1st sphere, the only way we can really be together is for me to get to the 8th sphere. Can you see? So I need to develop in love in order for me and Mary to be together. And there's a great pull on me from Mary in the 8th sphere for me to develop in love. Once she has developed in love, there is an influence, one half of the soul. Remember, every positive influence is permanent and long-term. Remember, we discussed the rewards of living in harmony with love. And one of those, remember I said that every time you do something loving, there's a permanent benefit. So one of the permanent benefits of a celestial spirit living in harmony with love is that if I, the person who's in the house, and a part of this soul, actually, when I start to, even just during normal life, there will be some level of influence over me from her condition onto me. And God designed it this way, so it just makes it easier for you to progress. Yeah. So you're not alone even in your progress. The other half of you is there too, right? Trying to progress.
And the loving influence is the stronger influence
Than an
rather
unloving
than
one.
the unloving one.
Yeah. The more unloving the influence is, the more selfish it is, and therefore the more self-absorbed it is, and therefore the more it's just like the half of the soul experiencing it. Does that make sense? So the more unloving your feelings are, the less impact you can have on the other half of your soul. But the more loving you become, the more impact you can have on the other half of your soul.
It's a
Is
good
that
system, isn't
by
it?
default?
By default.
almost?
Yeah.
Mm.
It's a very good system.
All
Thank
right.
you.
We're over at Phil, I think we were.
Billy also had his hand up there, yeah.
And Billy was it too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey guys, my question is actually about God's love on the effect on removing sin, but I was just going to mention about spirit attack actually, just because I had some yesterday.
Yep.
And before coming to the event, obviously I'm recording and things, and I felt this kind of feeling before I left to say, don't do this. This is bad. You shouldn't do this. And
Yeah.
but it felt very much like people behind a window, kind of projecting, just saying muffled almost sounds like, don't do that.
Yeah.
And I could just kind of politely told them to jog on, basically, and that I was going to go anyway, to do it. But my question was really about something you mentioned yesterday. So with receiving God's love, you mentioned that God's love can help remove the reasons as to why we sinned.
The cause, yep.
The cause.
Yep.
And, if I understand sin to be, my desire out of harmony with love, my desire to avoid my grief and fear and all these other emotions,
Yep.
but you also sort of said it's our responsibility to address our own sin. It's our own creation.
Yep.
So what is it exactly God's removing when you say that?
Well, every time you sin, every time you break the law, that is your creation, right? So firstly, let's make that clear. Secondly, every time you have a creation that is a sin, obviously that creation has effects. And these effects include some of the effects that we've listed here, right? Which include the fact that you become more evil, you become more lawless, you become more spirit motivated negatively.
Create pain for others.
You create pain for others, and also you're going to need correction and you're going to need reparation. These are all the effects of your sin. So all of those effects are effects and are going to, and even the need for correction and the need for reparation are effects. Right? The purpose of them is to deal with the cause, but they are effects of your sin. But there's a reason why you sinned internally. Does that make sense? A motivation, a desire that exists inside of you. And that desire comes usually from some point in your life, from some event in your life. Many times you don't even know what it is, but it comes from some event. Now, if when you receive love, if God's love can clear away your memory of the event, which is how it works, then of course the reason why you sinned is now cleared. So the way it works is that all compensation works on memories. So all change works on memories. But they're not what you guys feel are memories. A lot of you feel a memory is like a thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you mean more like an emotional memory?
Yeah, they're all emotions. And they do contain thoughts, but they contain far more than thoughts. They contain things like smells and emotions and experiences and sensory feelings and all sorts of things. An actual memory is made up of all the sensory apparatus coming from your physical body, all the sensory apparatus coming from your spirit body, and all of the senses of your soul mixed together to create the experience. So that's what is fundamentally a memory. To clear away a problem at its cause, the way you do it, the way God does it, is to clear away the memory. So he rubs out the memory at the emotional level, not the intellectual one. So the intellectual memory remains, but the emotional signature of the memory dissipates. You follow me?
Yeah, it's like reformatting a hard drive, but the hard drive's my soul.
Sort of, yeah, sort of. Of course, it only puts reformats one thing.
One part, yeah.
Yeah, the thing you become aware of, awakened to, right? But that's the way it works, by rubbing out the memories. By the way, the law of compensation, which includes correction, rubs out memories too, but in a very slow manner, and you've got to do it yourself. You've got to get to the stage where you forget. You follow me?
Because there's no emotional signature left on it.
Yeah. So if you look at the way God's love works versus the way the normal way of progressing works, compensation. Let me just sort of draw the two separate things, because this is a good question. This is a good thing to understand, right, for your progress. One works by you having memories. Now, we've had a lot of discussions about this with people in Australia, but there's recordings of it all, but we haven't had time. There's probably 1,200 hours of recordings we haven't edited, right, at this stage. So this is some of the things we've discussed. So you have memories. There's two ways to deal with your memories. One is to go through all of the emotions that remind you of the event to the point where there's no more emotions left. So you end up with no emotions, or you could say no emotional memory of the event. So let's say you're being abused. You'd have to go through the feelings of being abused or the emotions that they caused, until there was no longer any emotion associated with being abused, and you can't emotionally remember it anymore. You can remember the event in your mind, but it has no emotional power over you anymore. So that's one way. That is called compensation. Right? And in particular, it's correcting. It's not the reparation side of compensation, it's the correction side. Because once you have no emotion related to the memory, you're not going to act in the memory anymore. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yep. On the other side, so you can think about it as a doctor. I know you can think about it as you're dealing with the emotional person, and what you're doing is you're getting them to go through a process where they no longer emotionally remember the event. In other words, every time you talk about the event, they have no emotions left about it. It's like they can talk about the event as if it was like going down to the shop and buying some fruit or something, with no negative feelings associated with the event at all. It's not the same as denial, by the way, because people can deny events, but when you start talking about them, they're in a rage. So that's a very, very different state.
It's almost the opposite.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite, yeah. When people are in denial, you start talking about their memories and they're like, whoa. They get very emotional very quickly generally, which is indicative of the fact that they haven't done this, right? So by the time they got no emotion, that, if you ever read the Paget messages, that's called forgetting. In other words, the emotion is forgotten. Does that make sense? So that's the process of compensation. The process of receiving God's love is you have the memory, and the memory causes you to sin. So in amongst you there is sin, obviously. So you focus on the sin and repent for the sin. And what God's love does is it comes and rubs out the memory. So it's not rubbing out the sin. It's rubbing out the memory that causes you to sin.
So therefore you cease sinning a lot quicker. You still have your emotions and you still have the effects of the sin that you need to deal with.
Yeah, you still have to repair the sin. and people do, but there's no longer any personal emotional signature in the sin inside of them because God rubbed it out. So in other words, they've forgotten, but it was because of God's love being received. They've forgotten now.
And again, we're talking about the emotional memory of the event.
Correct. Not the intellect. The intellect always remains with you for the rest of your existence. So I can remember every event that's ever happened in my life. You follow? Right. The more connected to your soul you become, the more you remember every event that's connected to your life. So when I say I can remember, what I mean is generally humans can remember every event in their life.
It is possible.
Right?
Is that what you mean?
Sorry?
It's possible. It's a possibility. Yes,
you will
that
get to the
remember.
stage where you will remember every event in your life. Of course, some events are going to be very hard to recall because they might have happened 140,000 years ago. You know, and time has the effect of sort of, wow, there's a lot of things that have happened in between, over that 140,000 years. So I know spirits that are about 165,000 years old, and you know, when you talk to them about their experience when they're on Earth, it's like, just let me, just get me go through all of that first, you know, to remember that event, you know. So a man and a man, the first human couple, which you will have the ability to talk to when you pass probably, you know, they've got to cast their mind back to the beginning of human life on Earth to remember their life on Earth. That's a long time, right? So naturally they're going to take a while to recall it, you know, because there's a lot of memories to go through. And also the problem with recalling it is there's no emotions associated with those memories. So it's like, oh, that happened, almost like it happened to somebody else.
Can I ask one more question?
Can I just clarify one more thing that was inherent in your last question?
Yep.
It was about, because you referenced Jesus talking about how we have to be responsible for our own sin and relating that to repentance.
So this is me still being responsible for that sin,
just
isn't it?
don't be confused. That you are definitely, you feel like you are taking a lot of responsibility in the repentance process.
That was my next question. I was like thinking,
Total responsibility.
Doesn't this mean that I'm still taking, and also to be repentant, I am taking responsibility.
Yeah,
so
correct.
I'm already
Yes.
addressing that.
Yes.
Correct. So the sin you're taking full responsibility for, but the memory that triggers, you know, that basically is the fundamental operating reason why you sin in that manner is removed, just like it would be in this process, but it just takes a lot longer time, right, to get to a point where you forget.
It's like in this compensation process, the law is still forcing you, it's forcing you to take responsibility. In the repentance process, you're saying, I want to. I'm doing it.
Can I also say, though, compensation is forcing you through a process for your own happiness' sake.
Yes.
Actually, because it's like God knows that you've got a whole heap of things that you experienced on earth, and the biggest things that you're going to feel worst about are the things you've been guilty of doing. So in other words, you won't feel worse about your mum and dad treating you badly. You'll feel worse about you treating your children badly. Does that make sense to you? Like when you've harmed others, that's what you're going to feel worse about. So, and this is a common thing, the more sensitive you become, you feel worse about your own sin than you do anybody else's around you. In fact, you get to a point where other people who sin around you and you go, well, that's not me sinning, so it doesn't matter. You know, what matters is me sinning, because you feel that intensely, the pain and suffering internally that goes on when you sin. And so this process, God designed to make you happy, because if you no longer remember the emotion, the guilt associated with the sin, then of course you're now free of it completely. That makes sense to you, Phil?
Yeah.
So the purpose of both courses of action is to make you happy, to make you free of the emotion. It allows you to forget the emotion. And so the process of compensation will eventually result in the forgetting of emotion, just like the process of repentance will result in the forgetting of emotion. The difference is, with you in this path, you've got to work through your memories one by one. You've got to work through finding them. It's pretty tough, you know. Here, on this process, you've got to repent for your sin and the memory disappears. It's a lot easier. Remember, we're talking about emotional memory, not The experiential memory, probably we should say, because it's not just emotional, it's sensory and all sorts. That's what disappears. And you're just left with an intellectual record of the event. Because if you didn't have the intellectual record, you wouldn't remember what you've been through and what sort of made you be the person you are now.
You'd be just a happy, confused person with amnesia.
You'd be an amnesiac person, wouldn't you? And you know that people with amnesia are not necessarily happy, right? So,
And you wouldn't have moral development. Like this is a part of your moral development as well, you know. Yeah.
So this is a very powerful process, and you know, one way or the other, you're going to end up forgetting how bad you felt, which is really good, because you get to the stage where you experience bliss, right? One way or the other, that's where you'll get. Of course, on this path, you won't get that way you won't get to deal with anything with God. So you'll still remember how you feel about God. So a person who follows this path always still remembers, even in the sixth sphere, their feelings about God. So if they have bad feelings about God, they remember them. You follow? Yeah, so that's just something to bear in mind. There's many sixth sphere spirits we've talked to who do have quite dark feelings about God, but they are still loving to everybody else. But when we start talking to them about God, emotionally they feel very distraught, right? They've ignored it for such a long time that they think they've forgotten, but actually they haven't forgotten emotionally. It's still there. So they've been in denial of it, in other words, right? On this path, you'll also deal with everything about God. So in other words, you'll forget all your bad emotions about God on that path as well. They'll all go too. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. What's the time?
Yeah, it's 3:30.
I need to do a wee. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, me too.
We go, just have a short break so we can go to the toilet, shall we? And then probably that needs to be the end of our discussion, I think, and we'll focus a bit on after this about what we intend to do in the future and all those kind of things. We know some of you will need to leave sharply at 4 o'clock because you've made other plans. So feel free just to walk out. What we might do is just leave the one side of the back door open so that you can just go out quietly so you don't interrupt everybody else.
And if you do leave, thank you for your participation.
Yeah.
It's lovely to see all your beautiful faces.
Yep.
And yeah.
But let's have a break so we can go to the toilet and then we can talk a bit more.